Hi everyone, my name is Thomas Leblanc and welcome to the first ever episode of C2 Primetime. You can expect content that is inspiring, engaging, and informative from the team here at C2. And we're in the middle of C2 Online, the first ever week of conferences and workshops entirely online. And to kick things off, we'll speak to the Chief Creative Officer at C2, Génifère Legrand. Génifère, welcome to C2 Primetime. We are here in the office at C2 International, and C2 MTL is organized from here. And I feel this is very 2020 to be hosting an international event from your home, in a way.
It is.
Why did you decide to create this physical space to be hosting C2 in the office?
Because the offices were doing nothing for weeks, and we've been watching a lot of online events, and the interaction between humans were always the missing part of these events. So it was very important for us to find a way to recreate interaction between people, because it can be felt at home. When you are in your living room and you see two persons talking to each other like we're doing now, you have another feeling of the conversation, the authenticity, and it is even more, it is a great opportunity for them to interact though, even with people who are in the same room, and these are our offices, so it's a bit weird, but we have converted everything into a broadcasting studio.
It's really great, and also what you're describing is the feeling that people got at C2 when they were used to go to one of the big halls or the one where C2 Montreal is happening. Now people can connect online, which is also great. How did you transform the event in a way that is really quick and really impressive, because people right now are logging in from around the world to watch master classes, conferences, to do brain dates. So how did you transform the event so quickly?
So we brought the 4 pillars of the C2 experience that were used to organize and deploy through physical events, and we brought this online. So we are making sure that people are inspired through content, that they can learn. So we have conversation panels, and of course they can collaborate through workshops where they can truly engage and try to find solutions. And of course, networking is a huge part for the participants of C2. So through brain dates, they can connect and meet new people, and it's so important, especially these days, since everyone is working from their living room. So there's no happening, no gathering where you can exchange your business card. This is no longer relevant.
We really have to create something. In a way, you're kind of making history. I love that you brought up the word inspiration, because I think this is something we can really use this year, inspiration. Every edition of C2 has had a theme. The theme was supposed to be back in May, reinvention, which is not too far from what you've done, but you've decided to go for resilience.
Yeah.
So why the theme of resilience?
Because resilience is a process that you need to go through to reinvent yourself. So resilience is a process where you need to be open and adapt yourself without knowing what's coming next. And you need to be in that state of mind to embrace the novelty of what will happen, but also to be willing to take actions and to try new stuff. This is how our species have survived, through resilience. And resilience is also a humble theme that speaks to everyone right now. So citizens, mother, father, students, artists, and all the businesses are going through a resilience processes.
And I feel that also the theme of social change, which is another big theme of the year, is really impacting C2. But how can businesses, organizations, creatives really learn from the people who have an impact and do social change, and how can they use the platform of C2 and connect with each other? How can we leverage all this change so we make sure we keep it for the future?
And this is why we have invited a diversity of speakers, so we can tackle all these subjects about Black Lives Matters, about the environment through Jane Fonda. We talked about the future of workforce. So all these changes, this is for C2 the opportunity to give a voice to a diversity of people, and hopefully it will inspire the participants and they will be more pumped to take actions
Excited,
and make
yeah.
a difference.
Yeah, totally. Makes sense. Yeah, I'm pumped.
Great.
Thanks, Génifère. Thank you.
Thank you.
There were so many cool moments this week at C2 Online. First, all participants can still watch a masterclass from Malcolm Gladwell. Yes, the Malcolm Gladwell was at C2 this week. The best-selling writer delivered a masterclass on the art of curiosity. You can see it in the video on demand section of the C2 platform. You can also watch a live performance with Random Recipe as part of our Sunset session. The band performed and was also in conversation with Laurent Saunier. And you really don't want to miss the highlights from our conversation with Patrice Cullors, the writer, activist, and creator of the hashtag and movement Black Lives Matter.
We hear a lot about diversity and inclusion in the business sector, and there's a lot of focus placed on diversity and inclusion. What would be, in your opinion, the strengths of that trend and the pitfalls as well?
Well, I will say that I hate those words. The first thing I would do, and I've told this to many corporations, is stop using the word diversity and inclusion. Because usually what you do with diversity and inclusion is you create a quota in which white people in particular are saying what is diverse and what's inclusive. I would say challenge yourself and start thinking about a workplace that is anti-racist, a workplace that has an anti-racist identity, because you can have tons of people of color, of women, trans folks, of queer folks in your company, and it still be racist culture. It's still at the core of it being racist. Let's take police departments, for example. How many police departments have we seen that have a diverse police department? Let's talk about Baltimore and Freddie Gray. Baltimore Police Department was all Black. The people who killed Freddie Gray were not white police officers. It was Black police officers. And so people start to wonder, well, why would Black police officers kill other Black people? Well, it's not about the race, it's about the institution. So the conversation for businesses is less about diversity and inclusion. You could be diverse all day, and way more about an anti-racist culture that should be built inside organizations. One of the things I want people to leave this conversation with is join something. We need everybody to be a part of this movement, and being a part of this movement is not being a spectator. You may not be able to go to a protest. You may not be able to do the things that I do, but you can do something. Joining an organization, supporting an organization that's fighting for Black lives, or supporting an organization that you feel passionate about is really important. It's our duty as human beings to change the world for the better. And every single person that is listening in and watching this conference, you have the opportunity to do that. And so do not miss that opportunity to be a person to change the world.
Social change and activism is front and center this year at C2 Online. And I can't believe I'm about to do this, but I'm about to introduce Jane Fonda, the iconic actress, activist, writer, and fitness icon. She was here at C2 in conversation with C2's founder, Jean-François Bouchard, and here are the best moments from this talk.
La prochaine conférence vous est présentée par The following talk is presented to you by RBC. Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, veuillez accueillir, please welcome Jane Fonda en conversation avec In Conversation with Jean-François Bouchard.
Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à C2 Montréal. Welcome everybody. En direct des tout nouveaux studios de C2, we have the immense pleasure of having Jane Fonda with us. Hello Jane, how are you?
Très bien, merci. Et vous?
Très bien aussi. Before I start, a bit of housekeeping. on the right side of your screen, there's a chat box. And that's where we're going to be collecting questions for the second segment of this conversation, where I will relay your questions to Jane. Before we start, Jane, I have a bit of an anecdote for you. You probably don't remember me, but I do remember you because when I was 16, I first interviewed you in Montreal. You were then shooting the movie Agnes of God, and were kind enough to give an interview to me for our student newspaper. And this was my first foray in the communications world, and it turned to be my professional life. So I have to thank you for that. Now, 36 years later, we're still alive and kicking and doing this again together. It's pretty amazing. So thanks for accepting to join us.
It's good to see you're still alive and well, and how lucky that you knew so young what you wanted to do. I just want to say, you see my dog?
Oh.
C'est un coton de Tuléa. C'est une race française que j'ai achetée à Montréal.
Oh.
Elle est québécoise.
You know Montreal quite well, and you were supposed to be with us last May here in the city, but we'll take you online. It's better than nothing for sure. So obviously there's a lot to talk about today, but why don't we start by the beginning? Tell us about your early life and how you started as an actress.
In 2 minutes or less. I'm
It can be more than that.
I mean, it's a big question. I grew up in the United States. My father was a movie star named Henry Fonda. He was a progressive Democrat. And I loved him. I wanted him to love me. I admired him. I knew instinctively, even as a young girl, that his favorite roles were the roles in movies like Grapes of Wrath and 12 Angry Men and The Wrong Man, roles where he was standing up for the underdog, where he was fighting for justice. And I guess some of that must have gone into my bloodstream, like fertilizer that sat there for a long time until it began to sprout when I was older. But I really didn't want to be an actor because, you know, my dad never seemed to really enjoy his work. When he would come home after a day at work, he was always in a bad mood. There was no joy. And so why would I want to do that? Besides, I was very shy, and I didn't think I was pretty. So the only reason I became an actor is because I got fired as a secretary, and I didn't know what to do. And I had to find a way to earn my living. And so I was introduced to the famous acting teacher named Lee Strasberg, and he invited me to be in his classes, and he told me I was talented. And so the fact that somebody who was not an employee of my father, or it wasn't my father, it was somebody independent, said I was talented, suddenly I was permitted to want to be an actor. So I threw myself into acting. And then eventually, when I was about 22 years old, 23 years old, you know, I kept being put into these Miss America, you know, nice little American girl, very much under the shadow of my father. And I didn't like that. I wanted to make it on my own. And so René Clément offered me a role in a film called, what was it called? I don't remember. But it was with Alain Delon. And Les Félins. It was called Les Félins. And I came to France to do that movie. And while I was there, I met Roger Vadim, the French film director, who had just made a movie called Et Dieu créa la femme with his wife, Brigitte Bardot. And before I met him, he'd been with Brigitte Bardot, Catherine Deneuve, and
a bit of a
Troy.
womanizer, it seems. A bit of a womanizer.
Some pretty good women. And I fell in love with him. And so I ended up remaining in France and marrying him and being there for about 8 years. And until I realized that what I really wanted to do was to come back to the United States and join the anti-war movement. And that was in 1970.
Can you explain what compelled you to do that? Because you were by then already very successful in the entertainment world, a celebrity already, and so what prompted you to get into activism at that time?
Well, first of all, I've always been somebody that wanted to know, who am I? Why am I here? Why was I born? My life seemed to have no meaning. And, I was often quite depressed, because I think if we don't know who we are or why we're here, we can be depressed. And, but there were American soldiers who had been fighting in Vietnam and who had it. They turned against the war and they deserted and they came to Paris. There were a number of them in Paris.
Oh, really?
And they would look for their compatriots to help them with doctors or dentists or clothing, or, they didn't have jobs. And so I met these soldiers, and the soldiers started telling me about the war in Vietnam, and I had a hard time believing it. I was very, my father had been in the Second World War, and I just always thought that if American soldiers were fighting someplace, that it was good. It was this good side. But what I learned from these soldiers, and then from a book that they gave me to read, was that this was a very bad war, that this was a wrong war for all the wrong reasons. I was very close to Simone Signoret, the famous French actor. And so I went to her, and she, the French had colonized Vietnam. So the French were very aware of the fact that the United States could not win in Vietnam. The French were defeated by the Vietnamese. So the French knew a lot about Vietnam. And so I went to Simone to ask her to explain to me the history of Vietnam and the French role in Vietnam. And all of that built up in me until I decided that I felt very uncomfortable being an American in France, surrounded by French people who were criticizing the United States because of Vietnam. I didn't want to criticize my country while I was in France. I needed to be in my own country, and part of all those people that I could see on French television that were standing up to the military and protesting against the war, I wanted to be one of them. I thought, if you're ignorant, it's not good, but you just don't know. Once you know, if you then turn away, then you're part of the problem.
That's a good point.
I couldn't turn away. I had to go there. I've always been that way.
Your life is fascinating for the numerous transformations and reinventions that you did. That very first one was very risky for you, because it was a subject that was very divisive back then, and you took great risk in terms of your career. Did you fear losing your career as an actress back then when you did that?
I didn't care. Once I understood that the United States was doing bad things in Vietnam, that it was an absolutely wrong war, that had already killed 6 million people, what is a career?
Yeah.
No, I didn't really care. I was completely absorbed in this movement to end the war. And then on top of that, the people that I met, who were the other activists, were different than any people I had ever met. They were the women in particular, and that had a huge influence on me. These women, it was like looking through a little keyhole into the future that we were fighting for. They embodied the future that we were fighting for in terms of the way they related to people, to me. They didn't treat me like a celebrity. They saw me as a human being.
Tell me, when you got back to the U.S. At that point, you came back to a very divided America on the topic of war. In the backdrop, there was the Cold War going on. It must have felt like doom and gloom, a bit like what we're experiencing today. And I'd be very curious for you to talk to us about your perception of America back then, America today. What are the differences? What are the issues that remain the same? It would be interesting to get your perspective now that you have lived both. It would be fascinating.
Well, back then, like today, we felt that everything was at stake, that if we didn't prevail, the world was going to end, democracy was going to end, everything we cared about in our country was going to end. We were desperate. We were highly motivated. We were willing to sacrifice everything. That's true today. Back then, the big divisions in the country, they were generational divisions. They were cultural divisions. Today, it's racism. At the root of our national problems is racism. With the election of Trump, white supremacy has risen, and the majority of white people did not vote for Obama. They voted for Trump because they did not like the fact that a black man could become president. That's Trump's base. Some of those people now are peeling off because Trump is so offensive, but many still. The idea that, they're afraid that Democrats will allow a diversity in the American population that white people here do not like.
Fast forward a bit to the late 70s and the 80s. You went from fighting for peace to a series of different causes that you've embraced. Can you tell us about that process and also maybe explain how the videos, the workout videos, came into play to help you achieve that?
Well, in the mid-70s, the Vietnam War ended. There were 3 reasons the war ended. The Vietnamese themselves, who were willing to fight to the end. International public opinion that was vilifying the United States, and the American anti-war movement. That anti-war movement in the United States is left out of revisionist history, but in fact, we played a big role in ending the war. Around the time that the war ended, we were in a recession. And what was happening was corporate control of the American economy was gaining momentum. And so we shifted our focus to corporate control of our environment, of our economy. We began to focus on economic issues. And my then husband, Tom Hayden, and I started an organization called the Campaign for Economic Democracy. You can have political democracy, but if you don't have economic democracy, if there's terrible inequality between the people who have a lot of money and the people who don't, then there's no democracy. And we started this organization in California, which is a huge state, and we needed money, and it was a recession. So I started the Jane Fonda workout in order to fund the campaign for economic democracy.
So you became a social businesswoman before the term existed, basically.
Something like that. Yeah, that's right. Well, I discovered that there was a terrible, in my documentary, there's a section of these people at the airports holding signs, saying, "Feed Jane Fonda to the whales," attacking me. The person behind that, Lyndon LaRouche, was a terrible man that had this organization that would do that at airports or send men into bars where there were gay people and beat them up with chains. And I discovered that he funded his work with his own business. He had a computer business. So I thought, if I start a business, the money could go to fund what we're doing. And that's what I did. I didn't think it was going to be so successful, but it became very, very successful.
I think you're credited for basically launching the video business in America,
right,
in large part.
Yeah.
Right? You sold 17 million copies of these videos, if I'm correct?
Right.
That's
it's still the number one video.
Unbelievable.
But the women's movement was starting to talk to me. I mean, my marriage was not democratic, and I began to do a lot of reading about women's struggle for liberation and empowerment, and I became more and more interested in the role of women, and so I began to get involved in the women's movement.
Yes, and this is something you have been doing for the last 20 years or so.
Yeah.
And on that topic, I was curious to hear you on a few things. First one is, was it complicated for you to reconcile your role as a quote-unquote sex symbol and being a feminist? How did you tackle this?
Well, first of all, you can be sexy and a feminist. I know a lot of very sexy feminists. But I don't know. I didn't have to deal with it. I didn't think about it. I didn't see that there was a schism between the two things.
And you were never challenged in that regard, so that was not an issue for you?
No.
That's a good thing. My wife asked me to ask you a question, and it goes like this. Do you feel that the emancipation of women has put even more pressure on women who now have to conform to society's ideals of beauty, motherhood, but on top of it, also be very performing from a professional standpoint? It feels like we're expecting women to be superheroes, at this point in time. Is that something you don't view it this way? Can you explain your point of view on that?
Yes. Feminism simply says that all people, men and women, should be free to fulfill their full potential in life. If they want to stay home and raise children, they should do that. And what a great thing to do. If they want to go out and work, they should be able to do that, but they should be paid the same as a man doing the same work. There shouldn't be differences. So it's not telling women how they should be. It's simply saying you have the right to be and become who you want to be. The opportunity should be there for you as they are for men, and the playing field should be level and equal. That's what feminism says.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. In your career as an actress and also as a producer, you have used some of your movies or TV shows to convey messages. I believe the first instance was a movie 9 to 5. More recently, with your it goes before that.
Coming Home.
Oh, okay. So can you explain your thinking behind the role of entertainment to influence culture?
Well, movies influence culture, whether we like that or not. Is it intentional? With me, it became intentional. But movies are culture, and movies do influence culture. And there have been movies throughout the history of movies that have had an impact on our culture and have changed people's minds about things. And in about 1970 or 71, I didn't enjoy being in movies anymore. The kind of parts that I was offered did not fill me. And I had a friend, he was an African-American lawyer, a very left-wing lawyer in Detroit. And I said to him, I think I'm going to leave the business and become an organizer. And he said, Fonda, the movement has plenty of organizers. We don't have movie stars. Not only should you stay in the business, but you should be more intentional about your career. Make your career mean something. What a great bit of advice.
In recent years, and after this document was released, you started fighting for climate change. Can you tell us about how you embraced this very important cause and what you're doing these days about it? Aside from going to prison, I mean.
I have been an environmentalist for a long time. I love wilderness. I love forests. I love the ocean. I love animals. And I've tried to do things in my own life to become more responsible vis-a-vis the environment. Back in the 70s already, my husband and I had a home that was solar. It was run with solar panels, and on our farm we had a wind turbine that generated electricity. And up until about 2 years ago, I was doing individually, just me, I was doing all the right things, but I knew it wasn't enough. I knew that it was the place, it was the on-ramp onto the freeway. It was a first step. It was not the place to stop. It was where to start. And because I'm famous, I have a platform. And I knew I wasn't using my platform like I should. And I didn't know what to do. And I was so depressed. And then a year ago, Labor Day, I read a book by Naomi Klein. She's Canadian, Naomi Klein. It's called On Fire, The Burning Case for a Green New Deal. I read this book, and as books do this to me, it was like, I know. I read what Greta said. Our house is on fire. This is a crisis. We can't just go about business as usual. We have to behave like it's a crisis. We have to leave our comfort zone. I said, if Greta can do it, I'm going to do it. And I said, I'm going to move to DC and I'm going to start an action. And we decided, I worked with Greenpeace. I called the woman, Annie Leonard, who runs Greenpeace US, who's so smart. She's a great organizer. And I told her what I wanted to do. And so we decided every Friday, we call them Fire Drill Fridays. We got a lot of the young climate activists who were so important, the role that they played. They agreed to be part of it and to come and speak. And every Friday we would have a rally speaking about a different aspect of the climate crisis, how it affects oceans, forests, women, the military, jobs, all of that. And then we would engage in civil disobedience and risk getting arrested. And in the beginning, it's like, is anybody going to show up? It's like, giving a party and nobody comes. We didn't know. We had no idea. if it was just going to be ridiculed. This aging movie star comes into DC and thinks she's going to start something. But little by little, more and more and more people started coming from all over the United States. Our goal was aimed at people in this country who know there's a climate crisis. There's 23 million of them, but have never done anything about it. Mm-hmm. And they started coming from all over the country, mostly women. 2/3 of the people who came were women, older women. And they engaged in civil disobedience with me and got arrested, and they'd never done it before. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
So how many nights did you end up spending in prison in total at this point?
Just one.
Oh, only one. Okay. But still, it's a good story to tell.
It was jail. It wasn't prison. And I'm white and I'm famous. So how I was treated was very different than if I'd been this color. I'm well aware that I was by myself in the jail. There was a guard outside my door protecting me from who? I don't know, because who could get in my cell? It was pretty weird. I got arrested 5 times. And then I couldn't keep getting arrested, because if I had, they would have put me in jail for many months. And I had to go back to LA to start Grace and Frankie, which eventually we did. But then the COVID came and we had to shut down.
Yes.
But it was a great experience. So when COVID came along, we realized, like in November of last year, that people really wanted to be able to do this. They wanted to be able to do the Fire Drill Fridays in their hometowns. So I wrote a book called What Can I Do? My Path from Climate Despair to Action. And then when COVID came, we decided to continue doing them every Friday virtually. And we didn't know, because of COVID, are people going to stop caring about climate? We have 350,000 people every Friday. Since July, we've reached 4 million people. We have 15,000 volunteers that call climate voters who haven't voted yet. 2.1 million people in battleground states. We're building a movement. We're building an army. That's what we need. We need so many people that are willing to rise up. If whoever gets elected, please, we're going to be able to force them to do what's right.
Before we move to questions, I have 2 broad questions for you. The first one is, you've reinvented yourself many times throughout your life and remained extremely relevant throughout your career. Can you provide advice as to how to do that? What was your secret?
Well, you have to be healthy. That's the basic thing. Truly, and it doesn't matter. You could be in a wheelchair, but you can still be healthy, you have to be able to be healthy, which means you have to take care of yourself. You have to stay open. I always felt all my life I can be better. I'm too judgmental. I always wanted to be better, which means you have to learn from your mistakes. You can't kind of settle. I never wanted to settle. And so I think that it's kept me young. I'm almost 83 years old. I'm almost 83 years old. I have 2 fake hips, 1 fake knee, 1 fake thumb. But I think straight. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. And also, I have a lot of young friends. The activists that I hang with, they're young. They're young in spirit, but also they're young chronologically. And that helps too, because you learn to see the world through different eyes. The young activists, Greta Thunberg and the millions of young people all around the world that really changed the climate movement. They had a huge effect on the climate movement. And there are many of them now I know personally, and I work with them. And it's so interesting to look at the world through their eyes. It keeps you au courant.
Good. Last question, maybe before we wrap up. You've done so much in your life. What do you want to do next? What's the future like for you?
Well, the climate crisis is the big existential shadow that hangs over all of us in Quebec, in Toronto, in LA, all over the world. We're beginning to witness the unraveling of planetary life. I never ever thought I would live to see this. Huge numbers of species are dying, the oceans are warming, the forests are burning, and we don't have a lot of time. The science says, and this is very important, that we, and that includes Canada, all countries, we have to cut our fossil fuel emissions in half in less than 10 years. I mean, that's huge. And then we have to phase out fossil fuels to zero by mid-century. That means we have to stop the fossil fuels while we're investing in a green, sustainable energy sector. This is the biggest challenge that humans have ever faced. And what we do will determine whether there is whether there's a livable planet. There's a possibility that it's already too late. Although the science says if we can cut the emissions in half, we're all right. It will gradually get better if we can cut those emissions in half by 2030. So I think that for the rest of my life, this is what I'm going to be doing. This is what I'll devote myself to. I feel quite sure.
I wish you the best with that. I thank you very much for joining us. I also want to thank RBC for making your presence possible. Thank you very much, Jane. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure for me too. I love Canada. I love Montreal.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for watching C2 Primetime. And next week at C2 Online, we have incredible content for you. We have a conference with Gwyneth Paltrow, Jamila Jamil, Gary Vee, scientist John Cohn. There is a culinary challenge. On the Facebook page, you also don't want to miss a sunset session with Cali Technis and Moment Factory. And on top of all of this, there's a full day about the electrification of transportation and sustainable mobility called Forum Québec Electric. You really don't want to miss that. And if you don't have your tickets, you can still get them at c2montreal.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and take care.